Part 1. Formative Writings and the Doctoral Dissertation 1. General Introduction and Preface Surface Description. The volume opens with a general introduction provided by the editorial commissions of the Institute of Marxism-Leninism, Moscow and Berlin, and the publishers, Lawrence and Wishart, International Publishers. It contextualizes the works of Marx and Engels as the foundational texts of the communist ideology. It outlines their trajectory from revolutionary democrats in the late 1830s to the founders of scientific socialism. The preface specifically delineates the scope of Volume 1, which covers Marx's writings from August 1835 to March 1843. This period encompasses his school years in Trier, his university studies in Bonn and Berlin, his doctoral work on Epicurean philosophy, and his burgeoning journalism for the Rheinische Zeitung. Detailed analytical explanation. The introduction establishes the teleological framework through which these early texts are often viewed, as the embryonic stages of dialectical materialism. It emphasizes the unique collaboration between Marx and Engels, though Volume 1 focuses solely on Marx's individual output before their close partnership began in 1844. The text highlights Marx's transition from young Hegelian idealism toward materialism and communism. Crucially, it frames his early intellectual labor not merely as theoretical exercise, but as practical revolutionary activity. The preface provides the structural logic of the volume, dividing it into 4 sections: works, letters, preparatory material, and early literary experiments. It explicitly connects Marx's early critique of religion and censorship to his later, more developed critique of political economy and the state. Deep causal mechanistic interpretation. The editorial apparatus serves to anchor the disparate and often idealistic early texts, romantic poetry, legal reflections, abstract philosophy, to the eventual rigorous system of Marxism. By positing Marx's intellectual evolution as a necessary progression from the liberal critique of Prussian absolutism to the radical critique of civil society, the editors suggest a mechanistic continuity in his thought process. The law of motion of Marx's own intellect is presented as a dialectical movement, negating his early romanticism through Hegelian logic and subsequently negating Hegelian idealism through the encounter with material reality, with theft, winegrower's distress. 2. Reflections of a Young Man on the Choice of a Profession, August 1835. Content breakdown. Core concept: the intersection of individual ambition, social duty, and pre-existing determinants in the selection of a vocation. Arguments: the necessity of distinguishing between momentary enthusiasm and true calling, the obligation to serve humanity, the constraints imposed by social relations. Detailed reconstruction. The nature of choice. Marx begins by contrasting the animal kingdom with humanity. Animals act within a sphere determined by nature, pacific and limited. Man, conversely, possesses the deity's general aim of ennobling himself and mankind, but is left with the terrifying freedom to choose the means of this ennoblement. This choice is characterized as a great privilege, but simultaneously an act capable of destroying a life. The premise is that the choice of social position is the first major act of self-determination for a young man. 2. The danger of ambition and delusion. Marx argues that the inner voice guiding this choice can be drowned out by delusion. He warns against the demon of ambition, what is great glitters. Reason is presented as the necessary check against the impetuous instinct that confuses inspiration with vanity. Marx posits a psychological mechanism wherein a hasty choice based on superficial brilliance leads to inevitable disillusionment, resulting in a hatred of the self and the deity. 3. The pre-existence of social relations, crucial concept. In a pivotal turn of argument, Marx introduces a proto-materialist constraint on human agency, but we cannot always attain the position to which we believe we are called. Our relations in society have to some extent already begun to be established before we are in a position to determine them. Surface level. We cannot just be whatever we want. Circumstances stop us. Analytical level. Individual will is not absolute. It is circumscribed by an objective social framework that predates the individual's maturity. This indicates an early awareness of the tension between subject, the chooser, and object, social reality. Deep mechanistic level. This is the seed of historical materialism. The relations in society, later relations of production, are independent of the individual's will. Marx acknowledges that material and social conditions determine the boundaries of human freedom even before the intellect engages with them. 4. The criteria for a worthy profession. Marx evaluates professions based on worth. Worth is defined as that which uplifts a man and makes him invulnerable to the crowd. Servility versus independence, a profession in which one acts as a servile tool, degrades the human spirit. Only a profession allowing independent activity within one's sphere ensures dignity. Abstract truths. Marx warns against professions concerned with abstract truths for those without firm principles, suggesting these are dangerous, hinting at his later critique of pure philosophy detached from reality. The union of individual and general welfare. The essay concludes with a synthesis of egoism and altruism. Marx argues that the two are not contradictory. Man's nature is so constituted that he can attain his own perfection only by working for the perfection, for the good, of his fellow men. If a man works only for himself, he may become a famous scholar or poet, but never a perfect, truly great man. The mechanistic implication is that human perfection is socially mediated. The individual actualizes their essence only through the species. The ideal being, Christ, is cited as the exemplar of self-sacrifice. The final image is of the hot tears of noble people shed over the ashes of one who sacrificed himself for the whole, a romantic image of secular immortality through social contribution. 3. Letter from Marx to his father, November 10th to 11th, 1837. Content breakdown. Core concept, the intellectual crisis of a young student, the transition from Romanticism, idealism to Hegelianism. Context, written from Berlin to Trier. Marx reviews his blameworthy silence and chaotic year. Transition, the rejection of the opposition between what is and what ought to be. Detailed reconstruction. The lyricism of transition. Marx describes this moment in his life as a frontier post. He characterizes his state as lyrical, viewing life as an expression of intellectual activity developing in all directions: science, art, private matters. He confesses his deep love for Jenny von Westphalen, which initially manifested as passionate yearning and moonshine. 2. The critique of romantic subjectivism. Marx details his early literary attempts, 3 volumes of poems. He ruthlessly critiques them as purely idealistic. Mechanism of failure. The poems were marked by a complete opposition between what is and what ought to be. This dualism rendered them diffuse and inchoate. He projected his feelings onto the world rather than finding the idea within reality. Reaction. This realization led to a physical and intellectual breakdown. He sought to immerse himself in positive studies, law, to escape the abstract longing. 3. The struggle with law and philosophy. Marx recounts his attempt to elaborate a philosophy of law. The error: he tried to separate form, architectonics of concepts, from matter, the positive content of law. He describes this as creating a desk with drawers into which I then poured sand. Critique of Fichte. He notes that his earlier approach resembled Fichte's subjectivism, where mathematical dogmatism, abstract arguing, replaces the living development of the subject matter. The realization: the object itself must be studied in its development. The rational character of the object must develop out of its own contradictions. This is a move toward the Hegelian dialectic, immanent critique rather than external judgment. 4. The turn to Hegel. Marx describes a period of sickness and recovery in Strallo. Here the intellectual transformation crystallizes. A curtain had fallen, my holy of holies was rent asunder, and new gods had to be installed. He had previously disliked the grotesque, craggy melody of Hegel. Now, seeking to dive into the ocean of reality, he finds that the nature of the mind is just as necessary, concrete, and firmly based as the nature of the body. The Cleanthes dialogue. Marx mentions writing a dialogue to unite art and science. In doing so, he finds himself delivered, like a false siren, into the arms of the enemy, Hegel. The Doctors' Club. He mentions joining a club of Hegelians, including Rutenberg, where conflicting views were expressed. This immersion in the modern world philosophy silenced his fury of irony. The reconciliation with reality. The letter documents a shift from a subjective, should-be critique of the world to an objective, is analysis. Marx accepts the necessity of understanding the present, the modern world philosophy, rather than merely opposing it with romantic ideals. This sets the stage for his doctoral work on Epicurus, where he seeks the roots of self-consciousness within the history of philosophy. For early literary experiments, poems, selected analysis for relevance to intellectual development. The fiddler surface. A fiddler plays frantically, possessed by a dark power. Analytical. The poem expresses a demonic force. The art is not a gift from a radiant god, but leaps from hell's black mists. Deep interpretation. This reflects the young Hegelian fascination with the negative, the destructive, and the chaotic forces of the dialectic. It signifies a rejection of Biedermeier tranquility in favor of a revolutionary, if yet abstract, energy. Till bowstrings break my heart outright, art is consumption of the self. Alanum, a tragedy. Themes: destruction, self-annihilation, the curse of existence. Ulanum rages against a world that is clockwork, a blind machine. Mechanism, the character seeks to twine himself on the wheel of flame, of eternity, to destroy it. This is the ultimate expression of the opposition between is and ought, pushed to nihilism. It represents the impasse of romantic subjectivism, which Marx resolves by turning to Hegel. 5. Difference between the Democritean and Epicurean philosophy of nature. Doctoral dissertation. 1841 preface and dedication. Dedicated to his father-in-law, Ludwig von Westphalen, who Marx praises for his sunbright idealism. The foreword declares the sovereign authority of philosophy. Marx quotes Prometheus, in simple words, "I hate the pack of gods." This establishes the dissertation as a manifesto of atheism and the autonomy of human self-consciousness. Core argument: philosophy must refuse to apologize to religious or diverse authorities. Human self-consciousness is the supreme divinity. Part 1. Difference in general I. The subject of the treatise, Marx identifies a dull ending in the history of Greek philosophy after Aristotle. The Epicurean, Stoic, and Skeptic schools are traditionally dismissed as syncretic or eclectic. Marx's counterargument: these schools are not a decline but the prototypes of the Roman mind. They represent the birth of self-consciousness, the subjective form, after the total system of Aristotle. Significance: Marx chooses the comparison of Democritus and Epicurus because they are identified by previous historians as teaching the same physics, atomism, yet they hold diametrically opposed views on truth and certainty. This micro-difference reveals the essential difference in their spiritual principles. 2. Opinions on the relationship. Marx reviews ancient sources Cicero, Plutarch, who claim Epicurus plagiarized Democritus but worsened the doctrine. Marx sets out to disprove this entrenched prejudice. 3. Difficulties concerning the identity paradox. Both teach atoms and void. Yet Democritus is a skeptic regarding empirical knowledge, while Epicurus is a dogmatist who trusts the senses. Democritus's stance: for Democritus, the atom is the truth, the sensory world is mere subjective semblance, shine. He is driven into empirical observation to find the truth he cannot grasp, wandering the world, unsatisfied. His theory, atoms, contradicts his practice, empirical research. Epicurus's stance: for Epicurus, the wise man takes a dogmatic position. Sensation is the herald of truth. The sensory world is objective appearance, Erscheinung, not semblance. Epicurus is satisfied, blissful in philosophy, despising positive sciences. Deep divergence: Democritus sees necessity, determinism. Epicurus asserts chance freedom and rejects the slave of the physicist's necessity. Mechanism: Democritus uses real possibility, finding the specific cause of an event. Epicurus uses abstract possibility. Any explanation that doesn't contradict the senses is valid. Epicurus is not interested in the causes of nature, but in the ataraxy, tranquility, of the subject. 4. General difference in principle. Marx synthesizes the contradiction. Democritus: the atom is a pure, abstract category, a hypothesis for explaining nature. It remains an ideal being in self. His philosophy leads to empirical investigation but remains theoretically abstract. Epicurus: the atom is the natural form of abstract, individual self-consciousness. He carries the atomistic principle to its final conclusion, the absolute autonomy of the individual spirit. Epicurus objectifies the contradiction between essence, atom, and existence, appearance. By doing so, he dissolves the bond between nature and the spirit, liberating the spirit. Part 2. Difference in detail. Chapter 1. The declination of the atom from the straight line. This is the core of the dissertation. The tradition, Cicero and others mocked Epicurus for introducing the swerve declination of the atom to explain free will, calling it a childish invention without cause. Marx's reconstruction, the straight line, represents the atom's dependence on space, a purely material motion, a relative existence. If atoms only fell in straight lines, they would be determined entirely by the void. The declination, swerve, this is the atom's negation of the straight line, is the motion of self-sufficiency. By swerving, the atom breaks the bonds of fate. Philosophical implication. The swerve is not a physical event for Marx, but a conceptual necessity. It represents abstract individuality. Is the atom fighting back against the necessity of the fall? One surface. Atoms swerve slightly to collide and form worlds. 2. Analytical. The straight line is determination by another. The swerve is self-determination. 3. Deep. This represents the emergence of freedom and self-consciousness from a mechanism of nature. Epicurus projects the human will onto the atom. Repulsion. The swerve leads to the repulsion of atoms. Marx argues repulsion is the first form of self-consciousness. In repulsion, the one relates to another, which is actually itself, another atom. This synthetic relation allows the construction of the world. Democritus sees only the material side, pressure impact. Epicurus sees the form determination, self-activity. Chapter 2. The qualities of the atom. The problem. If the atom is a principle, it should have no qualities, which are variable. But to create a world, it must have qualities. Democritus uses qualities merely to explain diversity. He does not see the contradiction. Epicurus objectifies the contradiction. Size. Atoms have size, but not every size. Negation of the large. Shape. They have shape, but limited varieties. Weight. Epicurus adds weight. Weight is the individuality of matter, the ideal point of the material. Conclusion. By attributing qualities, the atom becomes alienated from its concept, abstract individuality, and becomes matter. Epicurus accepts this contradiction. The atom is both principle, essence, and foundation of appearance, matter. Chapter 3. Atoma archai and atoma stoichia distinction. Marx argues Epicurus distinguishes between atoms as principles, archai, and atoms as elements, stoichia. Mechanism. As a principle, the atom is pure, unmixed void plenum. As an element, it is endowed with qualities and enters into the composition of the world. This distinction allows Epicurus to maintain the purity of the abstract concept, freedom, while acknowledging the material world, alienation. Democritus has only the material substrate. Chapter 4. Time. Democritus. Time is external, an illusion to be removed. Epicurus. Time is the accident of accidents. It is the absolute form of appearance. Deep analysis. Time is the form of the sensuous. Human sensuousness is embodied time. For Epicurus, because things appear in time, they pass away. Time separates essence from existence. By banishing time from the world of atoms' essence, Epicurus guarantees the eternity of the principle. By accepting it in the world of appearance, he validates the reality of human sensation. Chapter 5. The meteors, celestial bodies. Context. The worship of celestial bodies was central to Greek religion, star worship. They were seen as divine, eternal, and rational. Epicurus's radicalism. He declares the meteors to be the enemies of ataraxy, peace of mind. The argument. If the stars are orderly and eternal divine beings, human self-consciousness is enslaved by a higher power. Therefore, Epicurus asserts they are merely complexes of atoms, behaving accidentally. Method of possibility. We must accept any explanation for celestial phenomena, eclipses, rising setting, as long as it doesn't contradict the senses. There is no single truth here. Deep implication. Epicurus destroys the immanent rationality of nature to save the freedom of the individual consciousness. If nature is rational and necessary, man is not free. Therefore, nature must be accidental. The gastrology of Archestratus, worship of the belly senses, is not the principle. The principle is the absoluteness of the self-consciousness. 6. Comments on the latest Prussian censorship instruction, 1842. Context. Written in early 1842 for the Deutsche Jahrbucher, banned later published in Anecdota. The Prussian government issued a new instruction, December 24, 1841, ostensibly relaxing censorship. Marx exposes it as a pseudo-liberal maneuver reinforcing control. Detailed analysis. The contradiction of serious and modest investigation. The instruction allows serious and modest investigation of truth. Marx deconstructs these adjectives. Truth. Truth is not modest. Truth is as little modest as light. Modesty is a restriction on the character of investigation, a fear of the truth. Style. The law prescribes the style, modesty, seriousness. Marx argues, the law permits me to write, only I must write in a style that is not mine. This violates the spiritual individuality of the writer. It forces the spirit to wear a uniform, gray, all gray. Logic. If the investigation is serious, it may reach conclusions the state dislikes. If the state prescribes the conclusion, the investigation is a sham. 2. The Christian state and the attack on rationalism. The instruction forbids frivolous, hostile attacks on the Christian religion. Marx notes the shift from the old decree, protecting religion in general, to protecting Christianity specifically. The trap. Only frivolous attacks are forbidden. Does this mean serious attacks are allowed? No, because a serious attack is deemed hostile. Therefore, all attacks are forbidden. Political theology. The instruction confuses the political and religious spheres. It protects the Christian state. Marx argues that a state based on religion is not a state of free reason. It introduces confessionalism into politics, turning the state into an organ of the church. 3. Laws on tendency. Tendens. The instruction bans works with a bad tendency. Critique. This is terrorism of the disposition. It punishes not the act, what is written, but the thought, the presumed intention. It removes objective legal standards. Laws which make their main criterion not actions as such, but the frame of mind of the doer, are nothing but positive sanctions for lawlessness. The censor as judge. The censor becomes the sole judge of this abstract tendency. The censor is accuser, defender, and judge in one. 4. The definition of the censor. The instruction relies on the scientific qualification and enlightened nature of the censor. Marx mocks this. If such a legion of universal geniuses exists in the government to censor the press, why do they not write the books themselves and save us the trouble? The censorship demands trust in officials, but institutionalizes distrust of the people. V. Conclusion. The pseudo-liberalism of the instruction is exposed. It seeks to maintain the appearance of improvement while tightening the reality of control. The only radical cure for censorship is its abolition. Rara temporum felicitas, ubi quae velis sentire et quae sensus dicere licet. Tacitus. O rare happiness of the times where it is permitted to think what you will and say what you think. Part 2. Journalism and the Struggle for Freedom. Rheinische Zeitung. Period. 7. Proceedings of the 6th Rhine Province Assembly. First article. Debates on freedom of the press and publication of the Proceedings of the Assembly of the Estates. May 1842. Context and structure. This is Marx's first major contribution to the Rheinische Zeitung. It marks his transition from abstract philosophical critique to direct political engagement. The article analyses the debates of the Rhineland Provincial Assembly, Landtag, of 1841 regarding press freedom. Marx does not simply report, he dissects the estate spirit manifested by different speakers. The article is structured by analyzing the speakers according to their estate, the princely estate, the knightly estate, and the urban peasant estates. Detailed reconstruction. Introduction. The Confessions of the Preußische Staatszeitung. Marx begins with a satirical critique of the official Prussian state newspaper, which had questioned the value of the greater freedom supposedly granted by the new censorship instructions. He exposes the government's attempt to frame the press as uninteresting if it doesn't serve state interests. He ridicules the state's obsession with statistics. I know a man's head when I know how many hairs grow on it, and spatial magnitude, preferring thick books to newspapers. 2. The polemic of the princely estate. Fürstenstand. Argument. Censorship is a lesser evil than the excesses of a free press. Marx's counter-argument. This is the diplomatic argument. It presupposes that freedom is an evil. By calling censorship a lesser evil, the speaker admits it is an evil. Why should the human spirit be subjected to a permanent evil? Historical argument. The speaker claims Germany's spiritual development has flourished despite censorship. Marx retorts, the spiritual development of Germany has gone forward not owing to, but in spite of, the censorship. To credit censorship for Goethe or Kant is like crediting prison for the eloquence of Mirabeau. The historical school critique. The speaker argues that the English or Dutch press cannot be models for Germany because their freedom arose from specific historical conditions. Marx exposes this as a reactionary tactic, rejecting the result of history freedom by appealing to the particularity of history. It denies the universality of human rights. Deep interpretation. Marx identifies the princely estate's position as one of supercilious superiority. It treats the people's spirit as tactless and indiscreet. It reflects a feudal worldview where rights are privileges, not universal norms. 3. The polemic of the knightly estate, Ritter stand. This section contains Marx's most vehement critique of the Romantic and Christian knightly worldview. Argument 1. Freedom of the assembly versus publicity. A speaker argues that publishing the assembly's proceedings would inhibit the freedom of discussion within the assembly. Marx's analysis: this reveals the estate's selfish conception of freedom. They want freedom for themselves, privacy, lack of accountability, but not freedom for the province, publicity. They treat the assembly as a private club. What is the use of a free assembly if the people are not free? Public life requires publicity. Argument 2. Human imperfection. The speaker argues that man is imperfect and immature, therefore freedom of the press, which allows the spread of evil, is dangerous. Censorship is a necessary guide or education. Marx's devastating rebuttal: if all men are imperfect, then censors are also imperfect. Why should the imperfect censor be the judge of the imperfect writer? Who censors the censors? The speaker thinks it wrong to put birds in cages. Is not the cage a preventive measure against birds of prey? The good versus bad press. The speaker distinguishes between a good press, which is modest, serious, well-intentioned, and a bad press, passionate, critical. Marx argues this distinction is arbitrary. A good press that is commanded to be good is not free. A bad press that is free is at least true to its nature as a press. The essence of the free press is the characterful, rational, moral essence of freedom. The character of the censored press is the characterless monster of unfreedom. Argument 3. Preventive versus repressive measures. The speaker prefers censorship, preventive, to press laws, repressive, punitive. Marx's philosophy of law. This is a crucial theoretical point. Censorship is a police measure, not a law. It punishes intention, tendency, before an act is committed. It subjects the spirit to a preventive torture. The censorship law is a law of suspicion against freedom. Press law is a real law. It defines objective crimes, e.g. libel, and punishes them after the fact via independent courts. The press law is a vote of confidence which freedom gives itself. Deep mechanism. Preventive laws contradict the nature of spirit. They treat the mind as a slave that must be watched. They presume the state is the sole possessor of reason, and the citizens are children. For the polemic of the urban estate, stadstand, argument: freedom of the press is a fine thing, but bad persons misuse it. Therefore we must be careful. Marx's analysis: this characterizes the bourgeois vacillation, half-hearted liberalism. It wants the privilege of freedom, but fears the consequences of freedom. It treats freedom as a property, or a thing, rather than the air the spirit breathes. Freedom of trade versus freedom of press. A speaker defends press freedom by comparing it to freedom of trade, Gewerbefreiheit. Marx critiques this reductionism. While the comparison has relative validity, emancipation of activity, it degrades the press. The press is not a trade. The writer who writes only for money is unfree. To view the press merely as industry is to apply the standard of a lower sphere, material production, to a higher sphere, spiritual production. The general conclusion: the debates show the assembly's incompetence. It represents particular interests, estates, not the general will. Core concept: the state should be the realization of rational freedom. An assembly of estates, representing private interests, inevitably conflicts with the idea of the state. Mechanism: private interest is blind to the universal. It sees only its own advantage. Therefore, the states cannot produce a true law for the press, which is the organ of the universal. Famous quote: a country which, like ancient Athens, regards lick-spittles, parasites, and flatterers as exceptions to the good sense of the people, is a country of independence and self-reliance. But a people which claims the right to think and utter the truth only for court jesters can only be a people without independence or personality. 8. The Philosophical Manifesto of the Historical School of Law, 1842. Content breakdown. Target: the Historical School of Law, Savigny, Hugo, which justified feudal remnants and absolutism by appealing to tradition and history rather than reason. Context: Gustave Hugo, the founder, had written a textbook of natural law, which Marx analyses as a cynical defense of the irrational. Core argument: the historical school validates any existing institution, slavery, absolutism, simply because it exists historically. Detailed analysis. The frivolity of the historical school. Marx argues that the historical school is the product of the 18th century frivolity, like the French Rococo, not a reaction against it. It treats history as a collection of curiosities to be preserved, regardless of their morality. 2. Hugo's natural law as animal law. Hugo's thesis: the only distinguishing feature of man is his animal nature. Freedom is not essential. Slavery is physically possible, and therefore lawful. Marx's critique: this is a degradation of humanity. If man is defined only by his animal nature, then the law of the jungle prevails. Hugo justifies slavery because it educates the slave, a cynical rationalization. Mechanism: the historical school separates the positive, what exists, from the rational, what ought to be. By declaring that reason cannot judge history, it sanctions every oppression that has historical roots. Is the theory of the ancien regime. Free marriage and the state. Hugo argues that marriage is an imperfect institution that satisfies animal lust. The state is a necessary evil to be obeyed. Marx's interpretation: this destroys the moral essence of the state and marriage. It reduces them to external mechanisms for managing animal instincts. Conclusion: the historical school is vague figments of the brain cloaking a dirty old idea. It uses romanticism and history to fight the rational state. 9. Communism and the Augsburg Allgemeine Zeitung, October 1842. Context: this is Marx's first public mention of communism. The Augsburg Allgemeine Zeitung had accused the Rheinische Zeitung of flirting with communism. Detailed analysis: the reality of the issue. Marx admits that the Rheinische Zeitung has reported on communist ideas, e.g., Weitling, French socialists. He argues one cannot ignore a movement that is gaining ground in England and France. Quote, today the estate that owns nothing demands to share in the wealth of the middle classes. This is a fact which is obvious to everyone in Manchester, Paris, and Lyons. Significance: Marx recognizes communism not yet as a solution, but as a symptom and a fact of modern reality that must be studied, not suppressed. 2. Theoretical versus practical danger argument. Practical attempts at communism, revolutions, can be answered by canon. But theoretical ideas are more dangerous. Mechanism: ideas which have conquered our intellect and taken possession of our minds are chains from which one cannot free oneself without a broken heart. They are demons which human beings can vanquish only by submitting to them. Marx's stance: he does not endorse communism here. He promises a thoroughgoing criticism of it. He sees it as a challenge to be met with theory, not police measures. This marks the beginning of his serious study of socialist literature. 10. Proceedings of the 6th Rhine Province Assembly. Third article. Debates on the law on thefts of wood, October-November 1842. Significance: this is arguably the most important article in Volume 1. It is the moment Marx turns his attention to material interests and economic questions. Engels later stated that this debate led Marx from pure politics to the study of economics. Microstructure expansion. The nature of the crime. The Assembly discussed a law to punish the gathering of fallen wood in forests as theft. Traditional right. Historically, the poor had a customary right, Gewohnheitsrecht, to gather dead wood. New legislation. The forest owners, private property, wanted to criminalize this act to protect their profit. Marx's distinction: there is an essential difference between gathering fallen wood and stealing standing timber. Fallen wood has already been separated from the tree by nature. It is an accidental product. Gathering it is an act of occupying something that has no owner, in the sense of organic unity with the tree. Standing timber is organically part of the property. Taking it is theft. Argument: by calling both theft, the law lies. It punishes an action that is not a crime, as if it were one. 2. Customary rights of the poor. Marx develops a legal theory of the customary rights of the poor. Aristocratic custom versus poor custom. The aristocracy appeals to customary rights to defend their privileges, which are contrary to rational law. The poor appeal to customary rights, like gathering wood, which are not yet laws but correspond to a natural sense of justice. Mechanism: the state laws have abolished the indeterminate property forms of the Middle Ages, where property was partly private, partly communal. In doing so, they ignored the rights of the poor, transforming their customary usage into a crime. The one-sidedness of the law has cut the lifelines of the poor. 3. The logic of private interest, the abject materialism. This is the core analytical section. Marx dissects how the interest of the forest owners dominates the logic of the state. The warden judge. The law allowed the forest warden, a private employee of the owner, to assess the value of the stolen wood. Critique: this makes the accuser the judge. It violates the basic principle of impartial justice. The state hands over its judicial function to a private party. The fine paid by the thief goes to the forest owner, not the state. Critique, public punishment is transformed into private compensation. The state apparatus becomes a tool for private enrichment. The wood thief has robbed the forest owner of wood, but the forest owner has made use of the wood thief to purloin the state itself. Degradation of the state. Marx argues that by serving private property so abjectly, the state degrades itself. It acts not as the representative of the universal, but as the servant of the rich. The soul of state is replaced by the soul of interest. Interest has no memory, for it thinks only of itself. It is a constant improviser, for it has no system, only expedients. For deep causal interpretation, Marx identifies a reversal of relationships. Surface, the law protects property. Reality, property dictates the law. The wood, matter, determines the state, spirit. This is a form of fetishism. The wooden idols, the trees triumph, and human beings are sacrificed. Consequence, this realization destroys Marx's Hegelian faith in the state as the embodiment of reason. He sees the state here acting as the instrument of a particular class, forest owners. This is a crucial step toward historical materialism. Statistical data. In the article, Marx cites specific examples from the debate. Value. The value of the landed property of the city of Berlin is $100 million, whereas that of the manorial estates in the Mark of Brandenburg is only $90 million. Yet the former sends only 3 deputies. The latter elect 20. Population. Potsdam has 1 deputy per 30,000 inhabitants, whereas Berlin has 1 per 100,000. Punishment. He notes the proposal that prison rations be reduced to bread and water to deter wood theft, criticizing the cruelty of protecting timber more strictly than human welfare. 11. Justification of the correspondent from the Mosel, January 1843. Context. Marx defends a correspondent who reported on the desperate poverty of the Mosel vine growers. The Oberpräsident governor, von Schaper, had demanded proof and accused the paper of slander. Detailed analysis. The system of administration. Marx argues that the poverty is not due to individual failings, as the government claimed, nor merely to natural causes, but to the administrative system. Bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, official understanding, cannot see the reality of distress because it relies on its own internal hierarchy and paper reports. It views everything outside itself as uninformed. Conflict. There is a conflict between the bureaucratic reality, in the files, everything is fine or improving, and the actual reality, starvation. Mechanism. The higher officials rely on the lower officials. The lower officials defend their administration to avoid blame. Thus, the system is structurally blind to problems. The state of distress of the Mosel region is at the same time a distressed state of the administration. 2. The need for a free press because the internal bureaucratic channels are blocked by their very nature. A third element is needed. The free press. Function. The press brings the language of reality to the state. It is the citizen's head speaking to the statesman's ear. Without a free press, the government is cut off from the people. Example. Marx cites official documents, e.g., a report by von Zuckelmalio, showing that the government consistently underestimated costs and overestimated income for vine growers to justify tax levels. He contrasts official statistics with the receipts of the actual growers. 3. Economic data. Marx includes data on wine prices and costs. Income versus cost. He quotes a calculation where gross income was $53, costs $39, leaving a net of $14 before taxes. After taxes and barrel costs, the grower faced a loss. Taxation. He argues the tax system was rigid and did not account for bad harvest years, driving peasants into the hands of usurers. 4. Conclusion. The insolent shrieking, as the government called the complaints, was the factual voice of distress. The government's attempt to silence it by administrative means, bans, proves the incompatibility of the current Prussian state with the needs of the social reality. 12. Letters, 1841 to 1843. To Arnold Ruge, 1842 to 1843. Key themes: the struggle with censorship, the radicalization of Marx's views, the split with the free, Die Freien. Critique of the free, man, etc. Marx criticizes the Berlin young Hegelians for their frivolous, rowdy, and incoherent behavior. They use atheism and communism as mere slogans without studying the content. Marx demands less vague reasoning, magniloquent phrases and self-satisfied self-adoration, and more definiteness, more attention to the actual state of affairs, more expert knowledge. On communism, in a letter from November 30th, 1842, Marx writes, "I stated that I regard it as inappropriate, indeed even immoral, to smuggle communist and socialist doctrines into incidental theatrical criticisms. I demand a quite different and more thorough discussion of communism." Resignation. In January 1843, Marx announces his resignation from the Rheinische Zeitung. "The government has given me back my freedom." He sees the censorship as a sign that the time for sober theory is over, and the time for more radical action is approaching. "I am stifling in this atmosphere." In this period, Marx moves from idealism to critical realism. 1. Starting point, Hegel's rational state. 2. Encounter, the reality of the Prussian state, censorship, with theft laws, mostly poverty. 3. Conflict, the state acts not as the agent of universal reason, but as the tool of private interest, forest owners, bureaucracy. 4. Conclusion, the existing state is irrational. To understand it, one must look not at the idea of the state, but at the material interests, property, civil society, that control it. 5. Method. Marx uses immanent critique, measuring the state by its own proclaimed standards, law, protection of citizens, and showing how it fails. He exposes the sophistry of private interest. This sets the stage for his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right in the next volume and his eventual turn to communism. The Rheinische Zeitung articles are the laboratory where Marx discovered the economic basis of political power. Part 3. Preparatory Materials and Early Literary Experiments 13. Notebooks on Epicurean Philosophy, 1839, Surface Description. This section contains the 7 notebooks, of which only 5 survive, that Marx compiled while researching his doctoral dissertation. They consist of extensive excerpts in Greek and Latin from Diogenes Laertius, Sextus Empiricus, Lucretius, Cicero, Plutarch, and Clement of Alexandria, interspersed with Marx's own philosophical commentary. These are not mere reading notes. They represent the active workshop of Marx's thought, where he wrestles with the texts to extract their inner logic. Detailed analytical reconstruction. The Hegelian framework. Marx approaches ancient philosophy equipped with Hegel's dialectical method, but applies it critically. He is interested in the subjective form of the post-Aristotelian systems, Epicureanism, Stoicism, Skepticism. Core concept, the emergence of self-consciousness as the absolute principle. Critique of Hegel. Marx notes that Hegel, while correctly defining the general features of these systems, viewed them too much as a decline from the speculative heights of Plato and Aristotle. Marx sees them as the necessary prototype of the Roman mind and the modern spirit, the liberation of the subject from the substance. 2. The battle against religion, Promethean motif. The notebooks reveal the roots of Marx's atheism. Plutarch versus Epicurus. Marx extensively analyzes Plutarch's polemic against Epicurus, that Epicurus actually makes a pleasant life impossible. He defends Epicurus against Plutarch's syncretic, senseless argumentation. Fear and divinity. Marx argues that religious fear degrades man. He sides with Epicurus's view that the gods should be removed from the world to ensure human tranquility, ataraxy. Argument: if God is involved in the world providence, man is not free. To be free, man must break the bonds of fate and the wrath of God. Deep insight. Marx notes that the ancients saw the heavenly bodies as divine. Epicurus's materialist explanation of meteors, celestial bodies, as accidental complexes of atoms was a necessary act of spiritual liberation. The absolute absoluteness of self-consciousness requires the destruction of the divine character of nature. 3. The atom as a concept of freedom. Marx refines his theory of the declination, swerve, of the atom. The straight line represents necessity, determinism, the material force. The swerve represents the form determination of the atom, its individuality, its ability to resist, its abstract freedom. Mechanistic interpretation. Marx argues that without the swerve, the atom would be merely a material point swept along by external force. The swerve is the soul of the atom. It represents the element of self-determination in the material world. This is a projection of the human ego, asserting its independence against the crushing weight of the external world. Marx traces the development of the Greek ideal of the wise man. Early philosophers, Ionians, the wise man is the bearer of the substance nature. Socrates, the wise man turns inward, philosophy becomes subjective. Epicurus, the wise man is an atom, isolated, self-sufficient, resting in ataraxy, imperturbability, indifferent to the world. He is a god among men. V. Critique of Plato and Aristotle. Marx contrasts the total philosophy of Plato and Aristotle with the subjective systems that followed. The Iron Time. He compares the post-Aristotelian period to the Iron Time that follows great creative epochs. When the universal sun of philosophy sets, Aristotle, the moth seeks the lamplight of the private individual, Epicurus. Significance. This reflects Marx's own historical situation, the collapse of the Hegelian system, and the need for a new, critical philosophy that turns toward the world. Statistical structural note. The notebooks contain hundreds of citations. Marx meticulously compares the texts of Diogenes Laertius, Book X, with the commentaries of Gassendi, and the polemics of Cicero and Plutarch, exposing the biases of the latter. This philological rigor underpins his philosophical reconstruction. 14. Early literary experiments, poems and prose, context. These works date mostly from 1836 to 1837, Marx's early university years. They include 3 albums of poems dedicated to Jenny von Westphalen, Book of Love, Book of Songs, and a book of verse dedicated to his father. The romantic spirit and its negation themes, violent passion, boundless yearning, demonic forces, destruction, and a Promethean defiance of the gods. The Fiddler. The art emerges from hell's black mists. The fiddler strikes a deal with Satan to play the Death March. This symbolizes a rejection of conventional, pious art in favor of a dark, revolutionary energy. Olanum, Tragedy Olanum, is a nihilistic character who rages against the clockwork of the universe. Quote, "And we apes of a cold god." Mechanism, Olanum wants to crush the world to pieces. This expresses the young Marx's frustration with the gap between the is and the ought, a tension he later resolves through dialectics. 2. Satire and humor, Scorpion and Felix format, a humoristic novel in the style of Lawrence Sterne, Tristram Shandy. Content, a chaotic satirical narrative about 3 holy kings, trousers, and Philistinism. Significance, it shows Marx's early attempt to use irony to deconstruct social reality. He mocks the Philistin, Merton the tailor, and the pretension of aristocracy, the wash closet, as the symbol of primogeniture. Deep layer, the fragment satirizes the abstract nature of German life and the positivism that accepts everything that exists just because it exists. Marx is struggling to find a realistic mode of expression. 3. Epigrams on Hegel tone, ambivalent. Marx feels the power of Hegel but finds his language obscure and his method arrogant. Quote, "Since I have found the highest. Rude am I as a god, cloaked by the dark like a god." Analysis. Marx sees Hegel as a giant who has captured the world in a formula but has thereby become detached from reality. Words I teach all mixed up into a devilish muddle. This foreshadows his later critique of the mystification of the dialectic. 15. Appendices, biographical documents, 1835 to 1843. School Essays, 1835, The Union of Believers with Christ, a religious essay. Content. Marx argues that natural human virtue is insufficient and that union with Christ is necessary for true morality. It reflects the conventional piety of his school training, clashing sharply with his later atheism. It shows he understood the language of religion before he rejected its content. Does the reign of Augustus deserve to be counted among the happier periods of the Roman Empire? A Latin essay. Argument. Marx argues that while Augustus brought peace and culture, he destroyed freedom. The state seems to us the most suitable for his time, for when people have grown soft. A ruler is more capable than a free republic of giving freedom to the people. Significance shows an early interest in the relationship between political forms and the moral condition of the people. 2. Letters from Heinrich Marx, father. These letters provide crucial psychological context. Themes: parental anxiety, financial worries, advice on career and conduct. The conflict. Heinrich is a rationalist, a Kantian, a lover of order. He is disturbed by Karl's demonic genius, his disorderliness, his boundless spending $700 a year when the rich spend $500, and his intellectual restlessness. Key quote, Heinrich, "I cannot always dispel the thought that were I in your position, I would show greater consideration. I do you justice. But I cannot entirely rid myself of the thought that you are not free from a little more egoism than is necessary for self-preservation." Prophecy. Heinrich worries that Karl's heart may not match his head. Your heart. Is it as good as your head? This tension between the demands of the family, bourgeois order, and the demands of the genius, revolutionary chaos, is the defining drama of Marx's youth. 3 documents on the Rheinische Zeitung, 1843. Renard's letter defends the paper against the charge of anti-Prussian tendency. Shows the tactical maneuvering required to keep the paper alive. Petition of Cologne citizens, protest against the ban on the newspaper. Shows the paper's popularity. Marx's resignation. The government has given me back my freedom. This marks the end of his attempt to work within the Prussian state and the beginning of his exile and explicit communism.